Robby, what's on your radar?
So recently I've highlighted several incidents on college campuses in which progressive student activists have prevented invited speakers from delivering their remarks. It happened at UC Hastings, and more notably it happened at Yale Law School, where the next generation of leading legal minds, judges, justices, and attorneys shouted down a conservative lawyer who was slated to engage in conversation with a progressive lawyer about religious freedom issues on which they actually agree. So I've been reporting on campus protests, free speech issues, actually for my entire journalistic career, which spans about 10 years. Higher education was actually my main beat when I started out, and these issues were the things I covered most frequently until the pandemic, when widespread school closures, other mitigation procedures caused me to focus on some other issues. But it's clear that the tendency to want to silence rather than understand the opposition did not die off during the pandemic. For the left, it's back and as powerful a driver as ever. So case in point, this week, students at the University of Virginia learned that the campus would soon host former Vice President Mike Pence, who is invited by UVA's chapter of the conservative group Young Americans for Freedom. Pence is scheduled to speak on April 12th, in just a few weeks. The Cavalier Daily, which is UVA's student newspaper, they denounced this plan and published an editorial the other day opposing Pence speaking on campus. Quote, the Cavalier Daily's editorial board does not condone platforming an individual that not only denies the existence of our diverse community, but participates in the violent rhetoric that perpetuates harm against these individuals. To our administration, we implore you to do better. Protect your students. Violent rhetoric. The direct implication of that statement is that the student journalists think UVA's administration should prevent Pence from speaking on campus because his words pose a physical threat to other students' safety. Consider how ridiculous that is. How could it be that Pence's mere words, his expression of his opinions, could constitute violence? Why is that ideology of young people that their physical safety is compromised if they have to listen to words they don't like? Yet that's exactly what the editorial concludes. Hateful rhetoric is violent and this is impermissible. That's what they think. That's what it says. Now, in reality, there's of course a major difference between hateful rhetoric and violence. What counts as hateful? If I said there is no God, that would certainly count as hateful for millions of people, but it's my First Amendment right to say it. The Supreme Court has been very clear on that. In fact, there is no recognized exception to the First Amendment for hate speech. Hate speech is an entirely made-up, subjective category. What one person thinks is hateful, another person might find inoffensive. More importantly, what one person thinks is hateful might be objectively true, no matter how angry it makes you. So it's important to remember that the right of Americans to say things that offend other people is actually one of the most visibly protected rights in existence today. The Supreme Court has litigated cases involving really horrendously awful speech and concluded that that speech is nevertheless permissible. In the 2010 case, Snyder versus Phelps, SCOTUS weighed in on the First Amendment rights of the Westboro Baptist Church. If you don't remember, that's the viciously cruel Christian cult that protests at the funerals of American soldiers while waving signs that say God hates gay people, God hates Catholics, God loves dead soldiers. Really vile, disturbing stuff. But guess what? The Supreme Court ruled that the Westboro Baptist Church had a First Amendment right to engage in those protests. It wasn't even close. It was an 8-1 decision. This wasn't a hotly contested matter. So if the Westboro Baptist Church has a constitutional right to wave their signs at grieving families of soldiers, then probably mild-mannered Mike Pence also enjoys the right to give a speech at a public university. So, this is another example of something I've been reporting on for a long time, and I'm not the only one. It's now something a lot of conservatives, centrists, even liberals have noticed and remarked upon. It still strikes me every time it happens. This is an editorial in the main student paper at UVA saying it would make the campus unsafe. Mike Pence's presence, his words would make the campus unsafe. No one will die because Mike Pence speaks. That's totally ridiculous, but it is the thinking. It is the ideology of a lot of young progressive people. And I've been trying for years to understand where that comes from. And it is clear to me it's not tactical, because when it's pointed out to them that this makes you look rather foolish and everyone's making fun of you for this, they don't seem to care. Their viewpoint seems to be that they have to do it because people's lives are literally at stake, they think, even though they're not. That words are the same as violence, that disturbing someone emotionally or psychologically is akin to violence and thus can be met with self-defense, essentially.
Yeah. I think part of it too is that people, particularly in their late teens and early 20s, who have a real sense that their obligation is to shape the world into a better place, are always on the lookout for an outlet for that energy. And they're going to channel that energy into places, where it has been carved out for it to flow. Mm-hmm. And right now, those are the fights. Like if you want to have a fight over the meaning of what makes a better world as a college student today, that's the battleground. Like whether or not Mike Pence should be able to speak. And once that's the battleground, all good and right-thinking people are going to be on the side of, well, of course he should not speak, he's bad. And the others, and there's no kind of left-wing free speech crowd that you can kind of slot in with that's going to say, I don't agree with it much or anything of what Mike Pence says, other than the fact that he didn't overthrow the government. Good for him for doing that. But I defend his right to speak. There isn't that kind of faction on campus. But I think on a higher level, there isn't. So when I was in college, there was the anti-globalization movement, and around that time there was the kind of anti-sweatshop movement, and it was intermingled with it, and there was the fight for a living wage. And so on Harvard's campus famously, but also on campuses all over the country, students got together and fought for higher wages. Justice for Janitors was the name. Fought for a living wage for the people who worked on the campus, trying to better their community materially and economically. And that was then the outlet for this feeling of guilt that is produced by the privilege of just getting to just read books and throw the frisbee at this immaculately groomed campus that you try to fight for justice for the people who are doing the grooming of it. And so that gave people, some sense of meaning. Some people are still doing that, but it doesn't have the energy. Right. It doesn't get the same media attention, which we're guilty of. Right. Maybe we can highlight some of those. So we say, hey, look, go fight in these. Now there was also the climate movement for a long time, and that is still popping. So maybe if you want to crush some of this stuff, you got to elevate the climate justice movement. Yeah, you got to, because the energy's got to go somewhere. Right. These kids have energy.
Well, and it's just such a lame expression of that energy. It's it's in some ways a similar phenomenon to the Karen type thing. That they're really trying to sick the manager, the administration. Yeah. That's which is the least radical thing of all that you can do. Yeah. Is ask the campus authority figure to assuage your hurt feelings.
Right. Yeah. For centuries, the defining feature of post-adolescence was being against authority. Right. And it is a new thing since the 2000s that these post-adolescents actually are just constantly appealing
to authority.
And they want more action from authority. The problem was that the administrators didn't do enough to take care of X situation. And how do they usually respond to that? They create a new sub-department with 3 staff, and boom. And there's another.
And they pay those staff members a lot of money.
And they got to have offices.
I FOIA'd all the salaries. Yeah. They're highly paid positions.
And who pays for that? Tuition. Right. And so then, you can precisely map this shift in anti-authority toward pro-authority to the ballooning of the size of college administrations to the ballooning of the cost of tuition. Yes. Now, it doesn't mean that all of those correlations are precisely what is driving it, but the lines overlap.
Right. It's not the faculty salaries have barely budged. In some cases, faculty are asked to do more and more, or adjunct faculty, people who are earning poverty wages despite all the debt they have that they've accumulated. That's not the issue. With the staff member, those salaries and just the number of staff members, those have grown unbelievably, ungodly growth in that sector. Right. But the other thing I just wanted to mention, I guess one of the reasons I'm always disturbed by these stories, and I try to call attention to them, the specific claim that words are violence is a weird and I think dangerous claim to make. Certainly, if Mike Pence's preferred policies become law, I see why, people who are against those policies, and I disagree with many of them as well, it is totally fair to say if these policies become law, they would harm, if your view is that you're against it, they would harm XYZ people. Absolutely, I get that. That is so different from saying that just him speaking is self-violence. That is a speech action that is eroding a distinction that exists only in the post-Enlightenment world, that your words don't need to be met with violence because they are just words. So if you offend my family, I don't need to kill you in a duel. If you say something against my religion, I don't have to have you burned at the stake. If you say something against my king, I don't have to have you executed. That is a new phenomenon that is a good violence-limiting, violence-decreasing phenomenon. So it's very weird to...
And the flip side of the branding of support for free speech as being a right-wing thing is the most stunning kind of turnaround in my lifetime.
Right, yeah. And the right's often not honest about it.
Yeah, and guess what? They're not for free speech.
Books taken off shelves. Books taken off shelves on one hand, and people, silenced when they're trying to speak in a public square, in a public forum by the other side.
Yeah.
Terrible. But I'm looking forward to what's on your radar coming up next.